And I'm very happy once again to present this material to you on a pretty regular basis every week, most of the time on Friday mornings. And this is Live with Dr. Perry. Today's subject matter has to do with something that I consider to be so elementary and so powerful and so unbelievably obvious. I'm just struck with how most people, as they live their lives, figure out a way to shoot themselves in the foot, then do something that could be this obvious and this powerful. This is called axiom number 8. Those of you who have been following my material, you may know that this is called Axioms of Life. Axioms of Life are the many different basic foundational incontrovertible laws of how to live your life, or rules of how to engage, or methods by which you may really enjoy the quality of your life, adding some real value and quite a legacy after you move to your next chapter. So this particular one, axiom number 8, is called create your cheese list, focus on the cheese, or capitalize on your strengths. Create your cheese list, focus on the cheese, which I will describe momentarily, or it's another way of saying is focus on the cheese and capitalize on your strengths. If there's one thing I've noticed over a long period of time, the most everyone struggles with their self-concept. I've been a psychotherapist, a clinician, a executive coach, a trainer, skill builder with both large organizations and many individuals over many, many years. And if there's anything I've noticed virtually all the time, something close to most all the time, in excess of 90% of the time, most everybody spends their lives suffering from any and or all of the following. Think about how much you have spent entirely too much of your life with things like self-doubt, insecurity, poor self-image, chronic anxiety, self-loathing, low self-respect, feeling inadequate and defective, unloved, undeserving, like an imposter, feeling unlovable, unattractive, weak, and afraid. Think about how often you've spent entirely too much time obsessing about all those qualities that you and I would consider to be hugely counterproductive and often in reflection a huge waste of time. It is remarkable that most of us out there spend our lives perpetually taking inventory of what's wrong and defective about us rather than looking at our good qualities or capitalizing on our strengths. We spend more time obsessing about our weaknesses or our defects than actually concentrating on our strengths and making them bigger. Curiously, there is a curiously very special, limited time in our lives when we actually felt largely happy, pleased, courageous, and pretty good about ourselves. So if you really think about it, go back into your life. There was a period of time when you actually enjoyed life a lot, and you're very excited about it, and you felt really terrific about yourself, and there was so much to be excited about. Now, that period of time, if you really think about it, is entirely possible if you have small children. Your children are doing that exact same thing right about now. And think about the period of, let's say, elementary school, starting with, let's say, preschool and stopping at sort of towards the end of elementary school, ages, let's say, 4 to 11. Somewhere around age 4 to 11, that was a terrific period. If you really think about that period of time, we felt largely happy. Our parents and family largely were reinforcing, paying attention, loving, excited about our growth. We often liked to show off, and we'd sing and we'd play and we'd dance in public. And we would say things like this. When you were somewhere between 4 and 11, you may say, hear yourself or remember that you said, or your present kids at that age said, I'm 5.5 and I'll be 6 in September. Think about how often you would say, I'm 5 and I'm 5.5. Question: do you as a grown-up say, I'm 45 and a half? The answer is no. Most of the time at 45, you say things like, I forgot. When you were little, though, it was all very exciting. You say things like, I can hardly wait. Wow, this is so fun. And remember when you did this when you were little? Watch me. Watch me. You said you'd watch. Why aren't you watching? Watch me. And when you said watch me, you wanted them to pay attention. And they did. And then you showed off. You did a backflip. You did a backflip into the pool. You did a cartwheel. You fired up your video games. You did whatever you did to show off, because what you wanted is attention, and you got it. And you'll notice you wanted to show off. You got the attention. Your parents said, oh, good for you. Well done. And you were all excited. So therefore, you were always looking forward to things. You were always excited. You were happy to get attention. You got a lot of reinforcement. And that was a particularly terrific time in your life, if you really think about it. Certainly there are exceptions here and there. Having said that, most all of us really enjoyed that period. Age 4 plus or minus to about 11 plus or minus. Something happened, though, to us somewhere around 11 or 12 or 13. And we became any and all the following. We became self-conscious. We became anxious, worried. We wanted to fit in. We felt concerned about being unpopular, how we looked. We were continually embarrassed. Everything was embarrassing, if you remember that. Our parents and family started to ignore us or criticize us. We began to take things personally, and we started to rebel and feel very inadequate, as you may know. Sometimes we began to lose our smile. Somehow we lost our smile, and we replaced it with self-doubt and concern about, oh my God, what would people think? Oh no, what would people think? Never mind, you're very unlikely to ever take a survey and find out what people think. So therefore, from that point in our lives, 11, 12, 13, somewhere around there, we started to notice more about what was wrong with us than what was right. We started a lifelong series of habits, often pretty profoundly and continually, catastrophizing, awfulizing, obsessing, and worrying about everything. We started doubting ourselves, comparing ourselves to everybody else. We started to spiral down into chronic things like anxiety, or catastrophizing, and depression. We replaced courage with fear, initiative with hiding, proaction with reaction, self-confidence with self-doubt. If you think about that, we did a whole bunch of that, pretty much beginning in adolescence. We used to feel confident and proud, and then somehow we started feeling bad about feeling good. Think about that. We started feeling bad about feeling good. We started feeling a very big ongoing concern about being meek, mild, self-effacing, modest, and humble. We actually morphed into thinking that if we felt good about ourselves for a minute, we'd be accused of being eccentric, pompous, full of ourselves, conceited, and proud of ourselves. Somehow it seemed preferable to stop feeling good in exchange for feeling better about feeling defective and therefore fitting in. Our need to fit in and avoid the potential criticism from our classmates or anybody else was so important that we'd actually opt to feel bad or defective or less than or something. And what's interesting is if we were good at schoolwork, we would calm that down with playing dumb. Or if we got really good grades and somebody said, how'd you do on your report card? You'd say, oh, I did okay, as opposed to I got straight A's. Then you started feeling unloved. Then you started feeling unappreciated, disrespected, emotionally malnourished. And the result? Well, for an enormous population of us, the result is you started concluding that you were defective, inadequate, unlovable, undeserving, and substandard. You used to feel good about yourself, and then when you discounted every compliment you ever received, well, then somehow or another everyone felt disallowed from saying something nice to you, and they quit complimenting you, and then you felt unloved. So what did you do? What did you do? Well, over time, if you're like most people, how do I know this? Many years of working with countless people all over the world. And virtually everybody has some form of the same perpetual concentration of their own deficits. Somehow you actually bought the fear that you were substandard and defective, and at the mercy of what other people thought about you. Your self-doubt became bigger, and you replaced your previous self-confidence that happened, remember, age 4 to 11, with self-doubt. And for most of you, this has lasted the rest of your life. Think about that again. Something happened, probably 11, 12, 13, somewhere around there. And prior to 11, you felt pretty terrific about yourself, and you were excited about everything. Now, certainly there are exceptions all over the place. And having said that, what's interesting is most all of us felt inadequate, or feel inadequate, or feel too tall, too small, too fat, too thin, my hair is too straight, my hair is too curly, I never got enough education. If I were shopping for parents, I would have chosen some others. So think about how often you've carried with you feelings of all kinds of self-doubt or self-loathing or feeling inadequate or unlovable or defective or something. And you've carried that with you for the rest of your life. So, if that sounds even remotely familiar, and you'll notice that you have an enormous bunch of people your age who are carrying with them some form of the same thing and trying to cover it up all the time, tell you what, let's participate in a method to take inventory of the obvious and return to the way you thought about yourself when you were little. However, now let's behave like grown-ups at the same time. So I'm going to present to you something that I have been messing around with for a long time. I recently took a group of people, some 20 or so people in leadership positions in a company, an organization. And I walked them through this, and I thought, since I'd used this many times individually with private patients, I thought this might be worth giving a try to a bunch of grown-ups at the same time. What was amazing is it far exceeded my expectations in terms of its power, in terms of its simplicity, and how much it really bothered people to do something that really appears to be so elementary and so simple that most people had profound levels of difficulty doing this exercise. So I'm going to give you a very simple and powerful method for you to take inventory of the obvious. Now, here's a warning for you, just so you know. Here's a warning. This exercise will likely put you dangerously close to embracing the obvious and practicing common sense. Let me do that again. Warning, everybody. This exercise will likely put you dangerously close to embracing the obvious and practicing common sense. And as you know, common sense is very uncommon. And the exercise is called Create Your Cheese List. Create your cheese list. If you would like to perhaps operate from strength, if you'd like to capitalize on your strengths, if you'd like to feel pretty strong and good and effective and talented and continually developing for the rest of your life, then I encourage you very strongly to get some paper right now, get a pen, and follow along here with this particular exercise. You might think, as most people, oh, this is elementary. I mean, we could do this in elementary school. And the answer is that's correct. What's interesting, though, is how difficult this is for grown-ups to do this. And so, therefore, get something to write with, and we're going to create a cheese list for the next period of time in this particular broadcast. And I do encourage you very strongly to walk with me through this program and see what happens to you. There may be a real bewildering experience between the way this is supposed to work and how actually difficult it is to do it. It feels sort of bizarre. So, first thing I want you to do is let's get you started by some basic frames of mind. So think about Swiss cheese. If you think about Swiss cheese, when you do, what do you notice about Swiss cheese? If you're like most people, when you notice Swiss cheese, you notice that there's cheese in holes. Now, when you go eat Swiss cheese and you're looking forward to that particular taste, when you eat Swiss cheese, do you eat the cheese or the holes? This, by the way, is the relatively easy part of this. Well, the answer is, of course, you eat the cheese. When you go buy Swiss cheese, are you buying the cheese or the holes? Well, of course, you're buying the cheese. When you enjoy Swiss cheese in a sandwich, do you taste the cheese or the holes? Well, of course, the cheese. So, furthermore, if you could buy or go get Swiss cheese, that somehow some brilliant person out there learned how to make Swiss cheese without any holes, here's the question. Would you prefer that? Yes, I mean, it's kind of like when I was a kid, watermelons had seeds in them and we had to pick them out. Now, some brilliant people have figured out a way to somehow crossbreed watermelons. They're called seedless. The point is, if these brilliant people in agriculture can make seedless watermelons, would you prefer seedless watermelons? And the answer is yes. Kind of like if some brilliant person could make Swiss cheese without the holes, you would clearly buy it because the holes are the absence of cheese and it's irritating. So here's the deal. If you could say, yes, I like Swiss cheese, and yes, I know what it is, could we say the holes are the absence of cheese? Another way to say it is, could we say the holes are the price of admission to be able to enjoy Swiss cheese? Okay, so if that's the case, consider when you look at or eat or enjoy or buy or watch other people consume Swiss cheese, the cheese is what's there. The holes are what's missing. Let me do it again. The cheese is what's there. The holes are the absence of cheese, therefore what's missing. So now imagine you're looking at a giant block of Swiss cheese. Right in front of you, there's a big block of Swiss cheese. Now, if you look at it, you will see a bunch of cheese and a variety of holes. Yes? Yes? What has more volume, the cheese or the holes? Listen very carefully. What has more volume in a giant block of Swiss cheese, the cheese or the holes? Well, of course, the answer is the cheese, because if it was the holes, you could see right through the block of cheese. So there's a whole bunch of holes, and there's even more cheese. So if there's more cheese than holes, now imagine you are a block of Swiss cheese. Right now, imagine that you are made up as a block of Swiss cheese. Now, you have more cheese than holes. Is that true? The answer is, well, yes. And then if there's more cheese than holes, then could we say the cheese is what's there and the holes are what's missing? Now, if you think about the way you think about you, particularly if you're in adolescence and the rest of your life, you're like most all people out there, clearly well over half the population out there. What do you do when you think about you? When you think about your self-concept, when you think about whatever it is you bring to the table, when you think about your qualities, what do you focus on most of the time? Do you focus on your cheese, or do you focus on your holes? Well, my experience is, the answer is, it'd be terrific if you focused on your cheese. It's just most everybody focuses on their holes. Isn't that something? You did focus on your cheese when you were 5, 6, 7, 8. I can hardly wait. Wow! Watch me, watch me. You focused on your cheese. And that's when life was really fun. Now, something happened, though, and most of you, for the rest of your life, spend your days and months and years focusing on feeling inadequate, defective, unlovable, substandard, which means you're focusing on the holes instead of the cheese. That's what most all grown-ups do, is they spend most of their lives focusing on what's missing rather than what's there. On the other hand, if you really think about that, Swiss cheese has more cheese than holes. You, if you're a block of Swiss cheese, you've got more cheese than holes. So here's the question. If you know you have more cheese than holes, and all Swiss cheese has more cheese than holes, and if we think about what's there in you would be more cheese, and certainly while there are holes, there are just a lot less of them. Here's the question. When did you ever make a list or take inventory of your cheese? My experience about that question is if you've ever made a list, you've ever taken inventory, you ever spend much time focusing on how much cheese you have, the answer is about 95% of the time, in my professional experience, most people make a very impressive and long list of the wholes, meaning most everybody thinks about, obsesses about, feels concerned about the wholes rather than the cheese, which means that do most people ever make a cheese list? And the answer is nope. Well, of course you're going to feel some form of weak or dependent or stupid or unimpressive or unloved or defective or something if all you do, or most of what you do, is focus on and take inventory of the wholes, your wholes, instead of the cheese. So therefore, what are we going to do about this? Well, I want to walk you through it right now. Get your paper, get your pen, go through this, and I encourage you, by the way, if you find this whole broadcast helpful and valuable, make sure you do this with people in your network, because you will notice they will likely feel just as uncomfortable and just as bewildered as you're about to do this exercise. So what we're going to do is we're going to create your cheese list right now. And therefore, get a piece of paper, kind of looks like this. Put your name up here, put the date up here, and then the title is what we call My Cheese List. Name, date, and the title is My Cheese List. Now, on your piece of paper, what I want you to do is I want you to number 1, 2, 3 on the paper. Just number 1, 2, 3. Now, what I'd like you to do is think about your cheese. Right now, think about whatever your cheese is about. Think about your skills, your character, your physical condition, your habits, your assets, your value, your talents, that which people like about you, that what people respect or admire about you, that which secretly you might actually like about yourself. So now what I want you to do is think about whatever those 3 items are, and I want you to write down 3 of them. So now's the time. If you're like most people, you're going to feel uncomfortable. What do I write down? I mean, is that good enough? I mean, I just automatically feel awkward, uncomfortable, scared, worried, anxious, any of that stuff. Well, do you feel awkward? Do you feel weird? Are you concerned about whether this cheese is actually valuable? It seems like such an elementary exercise. How is it that it seems so difficult to write down 3 items of cheese? Just 3. Cheese would be something that you like, something that they like, something that they admire, something that you feel good about. Just 3 items of your cheese. What's interesting about this is how uncomfortable people are. And how do I know this? Because most everybody says, well, I had real trouble doing it. I give this as a homework assignment to many of my private patients. And one guy gave this exercise to, 5 weeks ago. And he stalled for a long time. And then he finally came up with 3 a couple of weeks later. And then 3 weeks later, after I badgered him, he finally came up with 12. And he felt really uncomfortable to have 12 items of cheese because coming up with 3 or 4 was difficult. The group that I recently took, I said, look, all of you, get your paper. We're going to write down a cheese list. It was fascinating to see all these grown-up people, educated, presumably capable, able to make complete sentences, had profound level of anxiety and disquiet coming up with 3. So let's suppose you've got 3. 3 items of cheese that you consider to be acceptable. Now, here's the grading scale. I want you to understand the grading scale in terms of all your items of cheese. At the bottom of the scale is what we will call it's acceptable. Meaning if we're looking at your cheese, whatever the cheese is, the bottom would be it's acceptable. At the top, it is what we'll call outstanding and you love it. And everything in between. So we're looking for items of cheese about you, your qualities that you consider to be somewhere between acceptable and outstanding, and you're going to write them down. Now remember, some people may really like some of those things about you. On the other hand, you don't. You'll say, well, yeah, but. All I want you to do is write down 3 items, 1, 2, 3, of qualities that are somewhere between acceptable and outstanding and everything in between. So here's what you may experience as you begin to think about how am I going to write down 3. You may say, are you sure this is cheese? Am I perhaps, if I'm writing this down, am I now concerned that I'm becoming conceited, arrogant, and egocentric? Am I thinking now, if I were to write down the cheese, keep in mind, you can keep this secret. I always tell all my private patients, keep it secret. Put it in a file somewhere. Hide it. Get a password. Because some people actually feel uncomfortable if you actually write something down that you consider to be good about you. Because why? Well, that might very well compromise your lifelong need to be meek, mild, humble, self-effacing, and modest. And therefore, what's really kind of curious is how often every time somebody gives you a compliment, your first impulse is to discount and invalidate the compliment. Because, well, in your head, well, I must say, yeah, but, this is good, but let me tell you something wrong about me. The reason why you're going to, in your head, invalidate or discount a compliment is because you want them to think that you're modest and humble. Here's the question. If I say something nice to you, about you, and then you discount and invalidate the compliment, am I going to really think, oh, gee, you really are very humble and modest? The answer is no. Because every time you discount my compliment, I feel put down. I feel disallowed by you to feel the way I feel about you. So therefore, what do? Most all grown-ups are emotionally malnourished. Most all grown-ups spend a fair amount of time reinforcing small children and dogs. Why? Because kids want the compliments, and the dogs are bottomless pits need for petting and wonderful, oh, you're such a good boy, oh, you're such a good boy. So therefore, we're okay with complimenting small children, and we're okay with reinforcing dogs. When it comes to other grown-ups, though, we just finally give up. And the reason why we fail to give very many compliments to other grown-ups most all the time is because other grown-ups discount or invalidate the compliments when they get them. Which means every time I give you a compliment, if you want to discount it and invalidate it, which is very chronic, very habitual, and very often unconscious on your part, every time you discount the compliment, then I think you just told me I'm wrong. Rather than you get me the impression you're really humble and modest, what I think is you just told me I'm wrong. You just disallowed me from being impressed with you. So of course I'm going to quit telling you anything nice. And then what happens to you? You think, doesn't anybody care about me? Doesn't anybody like me? Doesn't anybody think I'm pretty good? Well, if you prevented people from telling you something nice, of course you feel inadequate. So, does this initiative of writing a cheese list show you that you are really unused to thinking about your cheese? Most everybody says, oh yeah, well, I'm used to thinking about the holes. I had a mother recently in a group say to me, Dr. Perry, when it comes to my small boys, I tell them to focus on their cheese all the time. I encourage them to think about what's good about them and focus on that. And I said, uh-huh. And then she said, but I don't do that with myself. And I said, so what you're saying is to your children, do as I say instead of how I do. And she said, yeah. I said, well, okay, so do I understand that you prefer to keep thinking about your holes when you really want your boys to think about their cheese? Is that right? Well, yeah. Well, if you just think about it, she had a big aha moment. She was saying, I want my boys to do this. On the other hand, boy, if I were to feel good about myself, that's unthinkable because I'm so defective. Does this exercise feel weird to you? Most people it does. How much does this tell you that you're much more likely to take inventory of your holes rather than your cheese? That's the big thing that's mostly bewildering to most people. If you actually write down a list of your cheese, it feels odd. It's almost as if you lack permission to do it. It's almost as if, who do I think I am? I'm thinking I'm good, and you're talking about that like that's something wrong or something bad. So now, if you actually got 3 items out, with this group I did of some 20 people recently, and we went through this whole exercise together, there was one guy who's obsessing for quite some time. The whole thing took about, just on steps 1 through 3, it took about, I'd say, 5-10 minutes for everybody to finally put their pencils down and say, yes, I got 3. And then I said, great, now, next step, write down 4, 5, and 6. Should have heard the groaning from this group. And I said, write down 4, 5, 6. They thought, I got those 3 out. I got to lie down. I'm tired. Well, they say, more? I have to do more? So, write down 4, 5, and 6 and go get 3 more items of cheese. And they just looked exhausted. How do I do that? And so now you got to look at what else do you like? Remember, the bottom is acceptable, the top is outstanding, and anywhere in between. You're just making a list of cheese. You can keep from letting anybody know what's on that list. It's entirely up to you. So think about, to help you perhaps add 4, 5, and 6, think about your looks, your skills, your values, your habits, your relationships, your activities, your routines, what people seem to like and find adorable about you. And the more you think about it, there's a lot more cheese staring you in the face. There's dozens of items that you can come up with that you would consider to be cheese. The thing is, if you spend most of your adult life, as most people do, feeling inadequate, unloved, ripped off, lonely, betrayed, whatever it is, invariably people take inventory of the holes rather than the cheese. So let's suppose you have now, in this exercise, completed 4, 5, and 6. If you have, that's great. Now we're going to get you out of control. Now write down 7, 8, 9, and 10. If you're like most people, you may think, what do you want, Dr. Perry? You want me to deal with anaphylactic shock? I may have to lie down before I do this. And what I would say to you is, you're out of practice. As you continue to write down your inventory of cheese, you might actually begin to realize you got a lot of cheese. There's a lot of things about you that, one, other people like or respect or admire about you. Moreover, they may have better taste than you. They think you're pretty good. You think you're pretty substandard. So what's interesting is if you actually write a list and you have the cheese list get longer and longer and longer, you will realize, embracing the obvious, you have a lot more cheese than you have holes. Just like regular Swiss cheese. There's a lot more cheese than holes. So here's your homework. I really encourage you to do this, and do this with people your age. And you will notice them feeling bewildered and uncomfortable as well. Meaning they want to capitalize on their strengths. They actually want to, somehow or another, when they do something well, they want to do a lot of it. It's just that more than half the time, they spend more of their time thinking about the holes rather than the cheese. Your cheese list will get longer. Keep it with you and keep adding to it. Over a period of months, you will notice that this list will, in fact, get longer. And in so doing, what's really nice about this, because remember, what you rehearse, you will duplicate. The more you take inventory of the cheese list, you begin to rewire your brain. Rewire meaning you start noticing and focusing on what's good and intact, on which you can capitalize. And therefore you have more strengths as opposed to perpetually feeling inadequate, unlovable, defective, on and on and on. You may even want to go to people in your network, some of your friends, and say, tell me what you think about me. You will feel bewildered about how much people appreciate and respect about you. Most people, if they know you reasonably well, think you bring to the table a lot more value than you think you do. This is so simple. It's so elementary. It's sort of bizarre. For a long period of time, I thought, well, if I do this with some private patients, that might work. On the other hand, if I do this with a group, that would just be ridiculously stupid. And the answer is nope. This one, what I did with a group of 20 executives recently, this one surprised me. And the reason it surprised me is because they all had trouble doing it. All of it. and this was an age group of, let's say, at the least middle 20s to more like middle 50s, 20 people. And now I'm going to do it ongoing with all groups as I'm starting to help people learn how to rewire their brain, operate from strength as opposed to perpetually from weakness. So therefore, the outcomes. When you do this and you practice it and you keep looking at it and you keep expanding the list, what ends up happening is you begin to trust your judgment. You capitalize on your strengths. You operate from more strengths. And moreover, you begin to build self-respect. You'll receive more appreciation and compliments from others simply because now you're able to say thank you and feel good about it as opposed to feel bad and afraid. The more you expand your cheese list, the world will get better. When you focus on the cheese and you take inventory of how much cheese there is, what ends up happening is then you find your smile, and then you keep your smile. The whole world right now is really compromised and very, very struck and affected worldwide with this whole pandemic. Makes people very, very scared. Makes people very, very uncomfortable. Turning people's lives upside down in so many respects, whether it's financially or how do I somehow do my work and still take care of my kids? How am I going to make a living? I've spent all my savings. I mean, just all kinds of fear and anxiety, creating difficulty for people. A lot of people are getting really angry. A lot of people are getting really depressed and sad and all that good stuff. So if there's a time that it might be good for you to begin the process of replacing perpetual, lifelong, many years of concentrating on the holes rather than the cheese, you might be rather struck to see when you make this list and you take inventory of it, you actually feel stronger. You actually feel better about the horsepower you've got. You generally feel more resolved and reconciled that you can operate from more strength. You can be more proactive than reactive. You can do something about it rather than just complain about it. You can operate from strength. And that takes practice. And therefore, remember, what you rehearse, you will duplicate. So in conclusion, let me suggest to you the following. I probably told you about stuff that you probably already know. Embracing the obvious and practice common sense. And you may have remembered in my conversation that from age 4 to 11, that was a pretty terrific time for most of you. It certainly was for me. Watch me. Watch me. You're not watching. Why don't you watch? Because what you're looking for is you want to show off, which of course is cheese. And then what you want is the audience, parents, or whoever it is, to say, good for you. And that feels good too. We have impulses to want to say that now as grown-ups. On the other hand, oh no, that's shameful. So therefore, for us, when they do something really well, we generally stop that right away. When kids do something really well, they do it over and over and over and over and over again. And so when kids have a setback, they recover very quickly. When grown-ups have a setback, they get on, disability or something. Because setbacks are just too difficult. You have no idea what I've gone through. So it really comes down to how do you handle good news? How do you handle bad news? How do you capitalize on your strengths? How do you recover quickly and get back in the saddle when you have a setback? Because everybody has to get back in the saddle. And getting in the saddle, again, for grown-ups takes longer. Recovery is slower. So my recommendation, quite frankly, is the following. This is a tough go. The entire world is going through a tough go right now with the pandemic. It requires that we, somehow or another, learn some lessons about ourselves as we're going through this unpredictable pandemic, when what we really would like to do is get the world back to some form of good and quality, and the divisiveness goes down, and the people showing care and regard and love for each other goes up, and our ability to capitalize on our strengths is bigger and more powerful than our ability to recover from setbacks. As long as you keep looking at and taking inventory of the holes, it's going to be more painful for you and others. The more you take inventory of the cheese, it's going to be better. You're going to find your smile. You're going to keep it. So I really hope you found some value in today's material. Create your cheese list. Focus on the cheese. And I do encourage you to let me know your thoughts about this, either on Facebook or on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, make sure you click on subscribe if you like the material, because we have more Axioms of Life and other skills that we're going to be presenting on Live with Dr. Perry. I want to thank you how much I appreciate your time and attention. I certainly appreciate your very kind remarks. Let me know what you thought about this material, and we'll be back in a week with another Live with Dr. Perry and some more thoughtful ideas on how you can function by far more effectively. Make sure you hug your kids or hug people you care about. Tell them how important they are to you, because life goes by too quickly, and therefore it's much better that you feed people with your love, care, regard, and support rather than stay silent or stay criticizing. Pleasure to work with you once again. Let me know what your thoughts are, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.